This podcast is brought to you by the Albany Public Library main branch and the generosity of listeners like you. What is a podcast? God, Daddy, these people talk as much as you do. Razib Khan's unsupervised learning.
Thanks for listening to the ungated version of the Unsupervised Learning podcast. If you want to read some essays on some of these topics, please check out razib.substack.com. Again, that's razib.substack.com. Thank you.
Even if you and your partner are healthy, there's still a chance your child can develop a serious genetic disease. This is because every embryo has new changes not present in either parent. Most of the time, these are benign, but sometimes they can be catastrophic. Orchid's whole genome embryo reports directly screen the embryo and analyze these de novo genetic mutations. Discuss embryo screening in IVF with a genetics expert. Hey, everybody. This is Razib with the Unsupervised Learning podcast. And I am here now with a returning guest. I think my friend Nikolai Yakovenko here. I think Nikolai might be tied with Sam Oburia as the most common, the most frequent guest on Unsupervised Learning. And the reason that he is such a frequent guest here is I like to talk about technology and artificial intelligence with him. Obviously, if you read what I write, I am not a specialist or I don't feel like I have specialized knowledge, so that's why I would bring Nikolai and people like Nick Casamides on the podcast. And I mentioned Nikolai and both Nick Casamides because I advise both their companies. I want to just get that out of the way. You see it if you follow me on X. You see it if you go to razib.com. And so there's that connection there. To make it explicit. So Nikolai right now is going to be he'll be talking about artificial intelligence, and we'll get to all those great details. But he also has a company that he's leading pretty hard into right now, Deep News, which is tied to artificial intelligence. Makes sense because he has been in the field for a while now. And Nikolai, could you talk about Deep News, why you're excited? Obviously I am excited. I am an advisor. I just told the listeners that. Tell people why you're excited, and then let's also talk about all the excitement that's been going on in AI and the various the big players that we have gotten to know over the last year and a half.
Hey, Razib. Yeah, so as a lot of you sort of know, these LLM models, large language models, are pretty amazing and can do a lot of stuff. But one thing that you notice is that they explicitly have a knowledge cutoff, and they don't really talk about recent things. Like if you ask ChatGPT what happened today, it doesn't give you very good answers. I mean, it can query Bing and whatever, but so. I thought it would be kind of interesting, starting a year ago, to go the exact opposite and say, hey, can we use AI to actually curate exactly what's going on? So that's kind of where Deep News was born from. So we look at a large number of sources, we write stories and maintain it. And I think what's really cool is, you can use AI to really cover all kinds of topics, including pretty niche things. So we cover hundreds of topics that we label. And, one thing that people really like is you can get your specific things. So you can say, hey, what's going on in sports or golf or San Francisco or AI or genomics? We will have that coverage. Now, obviously, you can look at a lot of specialized sources that do that as well. But I think it's pretty cool to have that succinct, done by AI, more or less in real time. Super, like I said, succinct. These articles are short. They do link to the longer sources when that's appropriate. And also, I think that there is an element of sort of kind of an open source neutrality to it as well, as we really try to cover sort of everything you may want to know. But people do seem to be, very, very excited about the ability to get their specific niches as well as the big things.
Yeah, I think that's key. One of the things is with AI is obviously it's not perfect, but there are a lot of with these LLMs, there are a lot of tasks where good enough is sufficient. So if I am developing engineering for a nuclear submarine, I do want perfect. But if I want the latest stories on ancient DNA or something, I think good enough would actually be sufficient. If there's a few random oddballs in there, it doesn't really matter. I really want 90, 95%. And so I think, there are certain niches that we're seeing AI and LLMs are already starting to be useful. I have a search on Feedly for certain topics, mostly science related. So there are already attempts to do this sort of thing with more primitive, recommendations, top-down queries, and whatnot. I think that in the future, though, you know what this is? Do you remember push technology?
Uh, is that a specific name?
Well, this was like a specific phase of the internet, probably 1996, a little before maybe you were paying a lot of attention. And there was this thing where you would install it's an app, but we would call it an app then, and it would like bring all this news and email and everything onto your computer. The problem with push technology is it just wasn't very specific, and also it like the bandwidth was like out of control. So eventually, it just faded away and people went back to the web portal idea. But in some ways, the need for both push and pull are always there. Younger people, for example, they do not like to proactively subscribe to things. They do love the YouTube recommendation algorithm, right?
Absolutely. That's right. Yeah, and you're right. Like the news is something where it's definitely a combination of push and pull. You want to search things, you want to find things, but you also just want to check, hey, what's going on? And I think to your point about being good enough, I mean that sounds like a little bit of faint praise, but it's actually the right idea. Is a few years ago this was impossible. Now it's relatively, I shouldn't say easy, of course. I shouldn't undersell what we're doing, but with a relatively small team and a fairly reasonable budget, you can sort of cover everything that's going on, not just at a surface level, but relatively deeply, and in a way where you can't really miss anything. So one example I use personally is something like law news. Like I've always been a bit of a law nerd. I'm very interested in what's going on with the SCOTUS, interesting decisions, things like that. That Supreme Court for for non-Americans, and like you could always read law blogs, subscribe to things, listen to podcasts, but it's a little bit too much into the weeds. Like I've tried to do it, I've never gotten into it, and now with our coverage, I just know that if I check that tab, I'm going to know what are the decisions that matter, what are the pending decisions that matter. I can always read more. It brings in the commentary from the law blogs where appropriate. Obviously, sometimes things cross over for various reasons. You may have a Supreme Court that involves a case that involves a celebrity. For example, there was like a music IP case a couple of weeks ago that was kind of interesting, where the plaintiff was Flo Rida, basically. So that was obviously got more coverage. And you're going to get all of that stuff in a succinct, super readable format, which I think a human could do, but it would be a lot of work. And I think the AI is quite good at it.
Yeah.
It's consistent. I mean, I started my career at Google Search 20 years ago. And that's something that Amit Singhal would always say, who was the head of Google Search, was like, hey, guys, a human could do this better, but it doesn't really make sense. So our machine learning, it was kind of like a humbling thing. We're trying to do a decent estimation of what an expert would do, but do it very fast, very consistently. And the consistency, I think is key. When you're reading a law blog, you are sort of swayed by that person's opinion. But if you're like, hey, you've got 7 to 10 law professors talking about it, and you can see them all in one place and have that be synthesized, I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah. Can you I'm gonna update. Let's do a status check on the big AI companies right now, like OpenAI, etc. Because Claude, as we're recording, Claude just had an update. Can you do a quick refresher for my listener? Because it's the first time you've been on here. I do have more, people, more subscribers, etc., etc. What is an LLM? And talk about really quickly how it's because artificial intelligence is a big, broad category of a bunch of different things, a bundle of different methods. Talk about how LLMs, like their trajectory of like when they got big and what they do in general.
That's right. Yeah. So obviously, like deep learning AI are things that people are pretty aware of. We're going to be focusing pretty much on LLM, which stands for large language models. So at a high level, this technology hasn't really changed in the last couple of years. The idea is you train this very large model on, let's just say, the whole internet, more or less, and it's able to do a few things. Most specifically is that it can answer questions and follow directions, but it also has a tremendous amount of knowledge. So just as a stylized fact, any of these top LLMs, and I'll get into what those are in a second, if you ask it like a basic question that can be answered from a popular Wikipedia page, like it can basically recite all that information verbatim. Like, it has that much knowledge. So like, think of maybe not the whole internet, but a lot of the information is in there. Every like lyrics to a famous song, even though that's an interesting case because of these restrictions, this hobbling stuff, which we'll also get into. Sometimes it'll be like, hey, I know the song, but I won't tell you. So you can sort of get into why that happens. But, at a high level, the LLM technology was just this like kind of amazing intuition that you could train a model. I mean, these models are quite large. They take many millions of dollars in just electricity to train on clusters that cost at this point, into the billions of dollars. But the point is, you take the thing, you run it through the internet, and it basically like zips all of that information into something that can be accessed basically in real time.
Yeah, and so I think what was it? I think first podcast probably we did was either at the end of 2022 or very early in 2023. The LLMs had kind of it was ChatGPT 3/3.5, and so the genius of OpenAI and ChatGPT is they realized, oh, we can get the public involved. And public doesn't care about an API. Public doesn't know what API stands for, but public knows how to interface in a chat window. That exploded really quickly, and the other companies kind of raced behind it. Obviously Google with Gemini tried to do that, and now Claude out of Anthropic has come up, which is Claude is the AI from Anthropic, and so there's all of these companies that are releasing and then matching each other. And there's also a whole proliferation of companies like Midjourney, which does, it's like Dolly, it does the visualization stuff. Those aren't LLMs though, right? Those are different, the Stable Diffusion, or like, what does the visual ones do? Like, what are they using?
Right. So there's just sort of this parallel path of basically image understanding and image generation. Like, you need to have understanding to do generation, but fundamentally the product there is you type something in and it draws a picture that matches your description. It's a slightly different path. Now, these things do get merged because the standard now for GPT-4o, and I think O somehow stands for multimodal. I'm not sure exactly how that translates into O, but it also does have this nice feature where you can understand an image and communicate in one model with images and text. But I think, not to say that's not important. I think that's not that important. Honestly, I think just the text form itself is quite interesting, yeah, quite powerful. Like, I can sort of explain why I think that's the most important. But like, words are sort of how we think and how we record information. The vast majority of human information on the web is text. So we can get into the weeds on the image stuff and some of the multi-language stuff, but even if you restrict yourself just to language and just to English, still quite a bit to do. And to your so you said it correctly. Like, GPT-3 was really sort of the breakthrough, but at first it just had all this knowledge, but it wasn't a product. ChatGPT with GPT 3.5, what they did is they did a human alignment where they said, hey, take this model and tune it, to get good at like question answer pairs, which basically means they gave it some examples they cooked up, and then they sort of did this like self-repeating loop where once it became decent at generating answers, and they would sort of have it generate different answers and have humans rate which is the best one, and you do a few cycles of that, and that's how we get these modern LLMs that we're used to, like ChatGPT, Gemini, and Claude, like you said. So fundamentally, yes, there's two components. You have this pre-training where you train it on the whole web, where it like gains the knowledge, right? And then you do this thing where you align it to human responses, everything from just teaching basic Q&A to also embedding all kinds of, let's just say value judgments. It's both inevitable, but I would argue that some of these companies may be, focus on that in a way that, isn't always great.
Yeah, well, I think the most extreme case obviously was Gemini's anti-racist historical personages. And so, do you want to talk about the Black Vikings?
I think
and the Black Nazis.
Yeah, that was I mean, honestly, well, you can explain that if you want, but I think it was great because it was so extreme. Like, it's sort of what is it? What is the what is it, the London quote, right? That heightened the differences. So to the point where it actually triggered a reorg at Google, where it was such an embarrassment for Google that they actually kind of had to reorganize their organization and actually change the leadership of the alignment team and bring it more into alignment with the goals of the company, because it was just too ridiculous. Even
basically it was you would put in a query like show me some Waffen SS, and Google would be Google would say make them black.
That's right. It would rewrite it, right? So like Ben Thompson had a great analysis of this. He even had a screenshot because there was a bug where it actually showed the rewriting that was supposed to be hidden, but briefly it showed it. So you would type in, hey, my favorite was, this is a Canadian GPT, right? Like style, you said, hey, like make us a picture of a bunch of people playing hockey. And it would rewrite it would take your query. It could generate the answer perfectly reasonably well, but it would rewrite it as, show us a hockey scene, make sure that you include like diversity of gender and ethnic identity. So you literally ended up with an Indian lady in a COVID mask playing hockey, which makes no sense, but it's kind of hilarious.
That's the issue. It's inadvertently hilarious. Inadvertently hilarious. So we'll go back to the technical aspects. I've been talking to you about this. Well, I mean, I think we've been talking in a way like on and off for 2 years, but it definitely broke open with OpenAI in 3.5 ChatGPT. Do you think we are where we were supposed to be in terms of world transformative impact with artificial intelligence in summer of 2024, a year and a half out? Like, where are we?
Yeah, so the short answer is no, absolutely not. I think that a lot of interesting things have happened, and I think it's actually interesting to go through what has happened in the past 18 months. But the trajectory has been absolutely not what was predicted, right? The prediction was that these models are going to get like crazy better every 3 months or every 6 months. The previous version blows the past one away. You have this like runaway winner with OpenAI, et cetera. And that's not what's happened at all. What has happened is that the models have gotten better, but the pace of improvement at these core tasks has almost certainly slowed down. But as a result of that, you have two interesting effects. One is you have a lot more interesting technology developed sort of around applications and also measurement. For example, LLM-based has been created, which is kind of the gold standard now. I'll get into why that's interesting in a second. But I think in a very good way, it's sort of debatable whether OpenAI sort of like let their lead slip or whether it was just inevitable. But now you have a situation where it's more of of an oligarchy where you have 3 to 6 to maybe, if you're really, really aggressive, maybe in as many as 12 or 13 organizations that have the possibility of training a world-class AI model that's basically on par with GPT-4. Now, some are a little bit better than others. Some have advantages, and then you can get into really specific things like having it be small enough to run locally on your, on your MacBook or next year even your iPhone. But even for the high-end models, like the truth is they haven't really gotten that much bigger and they haven't gotten that much better. So as a result, it's a little bit more like cars, right? Like the analogy would be instead of like Ford running away with the Ford model, with the consumer car market, the way they did with the Model T at the beginning. I'm not even saying this is true, but sort of people think this is what happened, right?
Yeah.
Then you have a bunch of entries, you had GM enter, and you end up in a situation where you have, at first, at peak, probably before the consolidation, how many of the car companies that we have in America that were legit? Probably like, between 6 to 12, right?
Yeah.
It got consolidated to 3 to 4. So and each model has like a little bit of a difference. Like they're all kind of more or less the same. They do the same thing. Like I like this car analogy because LLMs are a bit more like cars than like airplanes. Airplanes are very specialized, right? Cars are kind of all do the same thing, but they have small differences in features. Like your F-150 versus your smart car are kind of different, but they're kind of the same. Like they follow the same rules, they drive in the same roads, they do the same stuff. So that's kind of what we've seen. So for example, if you look at the LM-sys leaderboards, which we should explain what that is, I think is actually very interesting. Yeah, I mean, the lead is OpenAI, followed by Google, followed by OpenAI, followed by Anthropic. And then you have an entry from like 01 AI, which is a company out of China. You have a model from Facebook, you have a model from NVIDIA, and then it sort of tails off a little bit. And these models are all, according to, again, LM-sys, which is blind user ratings, about the same. There's differences. I'm not saying one isn't better than the other one. If you set up a chess tournament, and you had them play 20 games, the best model would win. But it wouldn't win all 20 games, if that makes sense, right? You would think it's like a chess tournament. You'd have a lot of draws and you'd win.
Yeah, there's parity.
Tremendous amount of parity. And I think that's kind of interesting from the product perspective, because that's when you get into differentiation. And I think already, OpenAI has, I think, tacitly admitted this, or at least part of their organization. They've become more of a consumer company. Their advantage at this point is already branding. The stylized fact is, I think if you go and you talk to random people in America who are outside of sort of the Silicon Valley bubble, I'd say a high percentage of them, I don't know if it's 20% or 60%, but a lot of them would have heard of ChatGPT. I'd be willing to bet that none of them have heard of Anthropic, less than 1%. But these are competitive models. So I think OpenAI is already taking advantage of that. They have to deal with Apple for distribution. So it's already becoming this sort of consumer tech thing where you differentiate on speed, on cost, and convenience, on branding, as opposed to what the story was supposed to be, which is every new model from OpenAI is going to be revolutionary. And that has just not been the case. Now, I think some people are hoping or thinking or expecting that there's a chance that GPT-5 will blow people out of the water. But the longer that doesn't happen, the less likely that becomes. And to be honest, already GPT-3 to GPT-4, while a big improvement, was a lot less than 0 to GPT-3.5. And in fact, if you actually break it down by tasks, there's many useful tasks that became possible with LLMs that were impossible before, where GPT-3.5 does just fine. So for example, if you ask for sentiment, if you ask for some sort of summarization, a lot of people still use GPT-3.5 until OpenAI phases it out in API setting. Because if you want to set up some sort of just LLM flow and say your app, the user is not really going to know the difference in many cases. Even GPT-4, while bigger and better and stuff, it wasn't a revolution, really.
Yeah, let me just reiterate something. So the secret sauce of of these companies is their models, right? But really, the key with these big companies is the training. The training is expensive.
Very expensive.
And that's their moat. That's really their moat, right? It's the training.
So yeah. I think the data is a really interesting case. I don't really want to get into the weeds and the law stuff because I'm not an expert on it. But in a stylized way, basically think of it like pre-2021 data. You have Common Crawl, you had all this stuff. Basically anything that Google could index, you could realistically train an LLM on. You had even giant data sets of things like Reddit, right? You could download all of Reddit and train models on it. We were doing this 10 years ago. We were doing this 7 years ago. This data set was kind of undervalued, underutilized, because before LLMs, it really wasn't that valuable. It was cool, but now all these things are shut off. So you've probably heard about the deals that OpenAI has made with the publishers, with Reddit, things like that. So going forward, if you want models that sort of have knowledge after a certain sort of think of it as a BCC kind of thing, right? There's a hard date, and after that, data access becomes a lot more difficult. So I think the moat is probably going to be if you want your model to, it's a data, right? Same for coding. So I'm jumping around a little bit, but probably the biggest. So where I will sort of go say there was kind of a real breakthrough was on the coding side. GPT-3.5 was not very good at writing code. The fact that it could do it at all was okay. But since then, it's gotten way better. And part of it is access to data, right? So GitHub Copilot, okay, I don't know. The thing is, but presumably it trained on GitHub, right? Actually getting the data, training on the good code, getting access to that. So I think going forward, yeah, there's probably unlikely to be a giant breakthrough in modeling, although you never know. So the real boundary is, yes, the cost of training and the access to great data.
So I do have to say, in terms of coding, Okay, this is maybe you can offer some insight. Maybe some listeners can. I have always been not the greatest at regular expressions.
Mm.
And so but I have to say these I mostly use ChatGPT 4.0 now. I was use Claude for a while. I go back and forth. I have
Yeah.
pro accounts to all of these. But I don't. They do regular expressions really well. I have to say, it's made a big difference in some of the work that I do. Well, candidly, some of the consulting projects in genomics that I do, where there's some pattern matching and some data format shifts and stuff like that. And I always had I could get it done. I could write a script that would do the conversion, but now I have to say it's much faster. So there are all these little things that are happening on the margin. I don't want to undersell, I think, where we are and all the little things that are happening in the aggregate due to the accessibility and the power of this AI technology. I will say, I said this on social media, I said this on X. There were people at the end of 2022 in group chats, not in public that I saw, but although some people are crazy in public were saying that, but there were people that at the end of 2022 who thought that AGI would be here by the summer, but that AGI would arrive at the summer of 2023 at the latest, and that our species would be over. And this is from people in the Bay Area who are in particular circles at parties where Altman would be, where people like Nat Friedman would be. I'm not going to name the person, but I'm not making this up as a generic person. This is like a real person. And they're not stupid. They're smart. But there was some crazy thinking that got unleashed by ChatGPT.
Oh, totally. And I mean, and you still sort of see remnants of that. And I'm not saying that idea is dead or will ever die. And I do think we should sort of take it seriously. Even if you don't believe in AGI at all, I think at least like the meta game of it is interesting. If enough people do, then it's a big deal, sort of like even in a cynical perspective. But I mean, even now, I mean, I don't live in the Bay Area, but when I visit, I think it's like almost inevitable to go to an event and a party and you'll have somebody, almost always a very smart person who's quite young, hence idealistic, who will give a version of, either AGI is here and we just didn't notice and it just sort of got lost. And like if we just had like, basically it's like if we had the right incantation, we would have it already. Or they will basically give a version of either like with one small improvement, it can do these amazing things. Or what people will often say to me, actually specifically, almost always happens at one of these events, is they will claim with a straight face, and they clearly believe it, that like AI can write, better music than professional musicians or something along those lines, which is like clearly not
Well,
true.
like Suno.
Yes, exactly. And that's always their take. And they're like, have you heard of Suno? I'm like, yeah, I've heard of Suno. I've looked at it. But it's just a weird thing where if you poll the audience, among informed people, very few people would actually agree with that statement. But there always are a few people who like extremely believe it. And I think, not to play psychologist, but I think the reason that they do is that, it's consistent with their other beliefs, right? Like, I think that, I mean, like, because it's hard, right? I mean, what's going on now is hard to comprehend. On the one hand, the models are getting better and they're clearly doing certain jobs, like some software engineering jobs it clearly can do. Another thing is you see these tests, right? I think OpenAI has been talking a lot about this recently. If you've seen these interview clips with like Mira Murati, but they're like, well, you have the path and you're basically like measuring the intelligence level, giving it IQ tests, like good ones, like proper IQ tests, giving it test exams. And you're like, well, before it was the intelligence of a middle schooler. Now it's the intelligence of a high schooler. Now it's a college. Next, it'll get a PhD. And I think the problem is, like I think people who are more from a prediction market or finance background, or just kind of like, I would just say practical people, don't really have a problem synthesizing this information that is clearly true. And yet other things are not true. But I think people who want to have a very simple, very cohesive world vision, you sort of have to say that AGI is going to happen because you just draw the line and you extrapolate. But the truth is, you can't extrapolate that far. Not everything behaves like Moore's law, and two, I just think that these are like really useful heuristics, but computers just are intelligent differently. For example, like as a chess player, pretty much my whole life, computers have been better at chess than like most humans, and for a lot of it better than all humans, and so what? Has computers transformed society? Absolutely. But we've seen nothing remotely resembling AGI from that. Like crossover between those tasks has not happened. So, another thing I'll say, and I'll stop rambling, is like for a human, I mean, this, a lot of things are super correlated. For example, you can give somebody a memory test and it's very highly correlated with like a proper IQ test. There's noise, but the correlation is very, very high. I know they gave me these tests when the brain injury stuff, right? Like, but for computers, it's not correlated at all. You have models with perfect recall 10, 20 years ago that can't do any reasoning at all, but there is no human alive that can remember all kinds of things and has no reasoning ability. So the computers just sort of like think differently. And I having said that, I do think the generalization of the LLM is different. I do think these models are quite different than the specialty chess playing models. But I just personally, I guess, don't really have a problem with this conflicting information that they're clearly getting smarter and doing more tasks. And yet it doesn't necessarily mean that, they'll take over the world. But I think people who just haven't been in the space as long, it's easier to have an aligned vision, right?
So I think one thing that I have started to think, it's kind of what you said. We use computation. Cognitive science uses computational analogy, metaphor for the brain, human brain, and obviously with artificial intelligence, we think of it as like our brain.
Yeah, we anthropomorphize it tremendously. We can't help it.
Yeah, but the issue is like perhaps we're not creating. Okay, what the hell is AGI? Whatever, we kind of know what we're talking about, but it seems like we are creating a new form of operation of cognitive operation of the universe that's just qualitatively different from ours. And so these attempts to one benchmark against humans cause problems because they're just qualitatively different. Now, let me use a metaphor or analogy. It's kind of like saying a bird versus a flying fish. They can both like stay aloft, but biomechanically there's all sorts of differences. Genealogically they're different, but yeah, they can both like go like maybe like 40 feet. The bird can go further, obviously, but they can both do this thing. And so, like I asked, I actually while you were talking about the Gemini and all that and OpenAI, I asked them about the breeder's equation, which is something in genetics. I just like to test them. I'm surprised Gemini Pro actually did better than Anthropic, did better than Claude or Sonnet, whatever, I don't know, 3.5. OpenAI did the best, 4.0 did the best, but this is something that I understand, and so that's why I asked you a question about something I understand, and it gave an output that was pretty reasonable, as you said. It can read Wikipedia, right? But that's the output. Like what the LLM and how it operates is like nothing like my brain,
Nothing.
And so I think that's the fundamental issue, that as you move from an AI scientist like you are, who understands the guts a bit on some, I'm not going to say surface level, because I just want to be careful with what I say, because when ChatGPT came out in the fall of 2022, some people in your field who are accomplished were very clear that they had not predicted this, which means that on some level, you guys did not have a full understanding, whatever that means, of the underlying architecture there, right? That was developing organically and then made a breakthrough, quote, quote, a breakthrough, right? And so we still have to have some uncertainty in our predictions here, but it's summer of 2024. I feel like things you said, I've had several people on, like Nick Casamides, David Mackay, from a computer science background, that have gotten into LLMs or were already like well versed in them, and the technologists tend to be far less into the we are creating a god that will take over and do all these things, and more like we are creating a very powerful tool that will be revolutionary, right? And so I feel, it's only a year and a half or whatever. It's not quite 2 years yet for me to pay attention to this LLM world. But I have to say that I think yeah, we need to a little less Yudkowsky and more other things. I guess is where I'm at least for the next decade.
Yeah, well, I think you said it well. I mean, we are creating something new, and it is distributed. It's not like a single person created or can stop it. So I think it's actually very reasonable to take some of the cautionary stuff seriously, because at least it's interesting, where it is new, it is kind of a runaway thing. It will transform society. I think all of these things are actually true. And it is a new form of intelligence, and it could be very interesting. It'll obviously be very good for some people, very bad for others. But more importantly, it's somewhat inevitable. Now, Eliezer would say it's not. He would say that if you what is it, the latest thing that he is saying, which I think is quite interesting, is what he wants is governments to put all the GPUs in one place, so then you can press a single button and destroy them all. He's saying you don't have to destroy them, but you have to have the option of destroying it. Like, I guess he is like really against the decentralization of it, like the anti-crypto, essentially, which is an interesting point of view. And I do think that it is a new thing, and new things always make differences, and new things are scary. And I don't think that's like a wrong opinion necessarily, but it doesn't. Yeah, the point of view that is most, I guess, annoying to me, for lack of a better word, is when people are like, yeah, it's a new thing, but we know what it is. We obviously don't. And the lazy analogy, it's like the human brain, and it's just not. But it could still be very powerful, and it could do some stuff. Who knows?
You think it will be powerful. But whatever. A jet plane is powerful. There's a lot of technologies out there that are powerful. I think the key is we thought that it was going to create a artificial analog of us, like our brain, like our.
Well, I'll give Yudkowsky. I give him, but let's give a little credence to his argument, because I do think that there is a fundamental difference between a more powerful car and a more powerful AI model, right? Like, one is trying explicitly to be intelligent, to take actions on behalf of humans, and the other one is not. I think that I'm open to the idea that these are just, it's just input output, right? It's just answering questions, but I don't think that's a convincing argument for the skeptics, right? Because because like the AI could, if it was a little bit better, it could go and it can go on Slack in theory, right? Or kind of almost in practice, and like take meetings for you, and it could take over my job and tell my team what to do. And you can say, yes, the humans don't have to listen, but you and I know they will. If we had an AI tell us like good ideas, we would probably pay attention to it. It would be like, hey, like Razib, like you should write an essay about this. Actually, I wrote the essay for you. Like, is this good?
All right. I listened to a little bit of this like brilliant AI musical.
In a lab so bright and beaming, Nikolai is always scheming, bits and bytes in endless streaming. AI world, he's always leading. Coding data, never sleeping, machine minds and circuits creeping. Future world in his hands keeping, Nikolai's dream never weeping.
Yeah, that's seriously not bad.
So I mean, this is yeah, we can stop now. But anyway, some of you have heard I mean, actually not some of you. You guys have heard the song. So this is the kind of thing. I just gave it I gave it I gave a very simple prompt about Nikolai Yakovenko. And it's created this, AI scientist Nikolai Yakovenko, and decided to like create this song. The song, it's not bad, and I kind of find it amusing. A lot of the Suno songs are actually quite amusing and funny, but it's very very hard in my experience, because I do have Suno Pro, and I have like written a bunch of songs, or not written, but I've generated songs about my friends just for fun. It is hard to use Suno uh, to like let it just kind of run wild and create something emotionally powerful. Like, it's like a
Yes,
song that like touches
it's
you.
completely vacuous, right? And
Yeah.
but here's the thing. So to give it credit, I mean, and I think a lot of the researchers that I know, they're, like the kind of stuff that you see them get into, be like, hey, yes, but you can sort of give it more iteration, right? Instead of writing just one song, it could write 100. It could do its own evaluation, or maybe even you vote like, oh, this part here is actually good. So like iterate on that, like workshop it, right? And actually that's been kind of a big thing in the past year. That's probably most of the excitement and the investments that you see at the at sort of the early stage level. It's things like that. It's like, here, basically put more effort. Don't just output it, but like iterate on it. Spend an hour or a day on it. This idea of agents, where you actually have different AIs like critique each other. One writes a song, and the other one's like, yeah, but this song sucks, and here's why. So try it again. I mean, it's this kind of like Munchausen idea, but it does work. So actually, like, you can't squeeze blood out of a stone, as they say, but you can make things, let's just say, 10 times better, 100 times better, whatever, through like iteration. And the best example is coding. Like you said, you can actually test if the code worked. You can write,
Yeah.
clean it up, etc. I mean, I don't personally think that you can. I mean, here, okay, I'll anthropomorphize here. You take a student of a certain ability or intelligence level, you can coach them up, but only to a certain point, right? Like, any good teacher, any good coach can make an athlete or a student or anyone better, but like within reason. So I think those differences are starting to be squeezed out, but I don't think that they're transformative. But I do think
Yeah.
it'd be a lot better. Like, to be fair, this is the first cut. And actually,
Yeah.
the place where this really comes from is actually going back to the games research, where if you take the best models for backgammon or chess or Go or any of that, like they can't just give you the best move, and that's a pretty good model. But what they actually do is they do a lot of local search and simulation, and that's what makes them like superhuman, right? Is actually like rolling it out, trying, editing, things like that. So there is a big push. Some of you have heard about the Q star concept. That's basically the idea. There is, hey, yeah, these chatbots are okay, but if you actually care about something, give it a task and let it sort of go to town on actually self-improvement, essentially.
Yeah. One thing I'll say is also with Suno, which is you guys can just check it out, Google Suno AI. But basically, you give it a simple prompt and it creates some genre of music, and they're not bad. It's just they're not great usually. But you can put in your custom lyrics. Now, I'm not a great lyricist, but who's a better lyricist than me? Claude or ChatGPT. Actually, Claude was the better lyricist than ChatGPT. And so what I do is I actually give a more complicated prompt to Claude, tell Claude to produce lyrics, like produce verses. Claude actually produces good verses compared to Suno, in my opinion. And then I put those into Suno, and then Suno sings it with the instrumentals according to genre. So bringing it together, you can imagine kind of like some sort of module where it's like Claude does the lyrics, Suno does the vocals, etc., etc. It will get better, and I think there are parts of artistic creativity where, yeah, we'll see. I mean, look, I think a lot of the mass-produced lowest common denominator pop music too is just, it's frankly not that great. Like, we don't remember the song, like the song of the summer from like 2018. What was it? I mean, I'm not saying that the music was better in the past, but there's something, I think that there is something about quantification, mass production, and the economies of scale that have kind of made music explore a narrower parameter space of bubblegum pop geared towards, let's say like mid-teens. I don't know. And I think that a lot of things changed when the SoundScan could see music producers and music executives could see exactly what's sold, and in some ways that was really great because it was giving people what they wanted. But sometimes people want things like Marvel movies indefinitely to the point where then they're just like, wait, this is crap. But it's because you kept narrow focusing on one little part of the creative space. And so I do wonder about that. I think humans, we're good at being unpredictable. We'll see, how good AI is in the future.
Yeah, I think all of that is true. At the same time, I think these models, even with all of these sort of hacks and improvements and agent models, and I can plug an API into this, into that. I love the idea, but if you really zoom out, it sounds like somebody looking for a cheat code, or kind of like it's Alibaba and the 40 Thieves. You just got to say the magic word, the magic incantation, and it gets better, right? Like so that those improvements are good, and maybe we get lost in the weeds, but the reality is these models still have like not just a vacuousness, but a little bit of a mode collapse, which is basically saying that they kind of revert to the same thing. So one thing you'll definitely notice with the song we played from Suno, but really all of the earlier LLM stuff, is if you give it a lot of guidance or if you give it specific lyrics, it'll be pretty good. But if you just say, hey, write a song about something, it all kind of sounds really, really, really similar. It just goes to your point, the same words, the same rhymes. Like it has this averaging effect, which is kind of inherent in how the models are sort of trained, where it goes to what is sort of like lowest common denominator, which I think is not really what people like the most.
Yeah.
I think people like that spark of originality and consistency. And I think for all of our attempts with math, and I'm not saying it won't get better, but it's been hard to do that. Like it's actually very difficult to get the LLMs to say something interesting. Like you can get it to say nonsense, or you can make it sound like something else. But one things that the models I think are shockingly bad at is if you just say, hey, like join this conversation, and just like make like snazzy responses and just say something witty in the context of a real human conversation, or dating app or anything just like that, it's incredibly bad at it. And as much as you try, it's just flat and corny. And but we know, and I'm not good at that either as a human, but we all know people who are amazing at that, who can do that like, every day. So why is that? I don't know.
So stepping back on like kind of into a broad macroeconomic scale. So Nvidia is a massive company you worked at now. Well, I mean, Nvidia was not a household name company wise a couple of years ago. Today it is kind of, especially if you read the Wall Street Journal business pages, stuff like that. I think it is now the most valuable company. And I texted a friend of mine and I told her, I was like, I think we're at the peak of this AI hype cycle. AI is here to stay. And my friend's an AI scientist. Like a lot of AI scientists that I know that work in the corporate world, they are it's good times. Good times are rolling. They just want to know how long the good times will roll. I think AI is going to be here to stay, obviously, just like the internet was here to stay. But there is a lot of money, sloshing around. I was talking to a friend of mine who's a scientist, and one of his crappier postdocs somehow got a job at Meta. And this guy is wanting to do a startup now, and he was asking his old postdoc how to recruit. And the postdoc was laughing at him because he said, look, I'm making $600,000 a year. Unless you can like pay people that much, you're not going to get anyone good. And this guy was kind of shocked because this was not one of his great postdocs. So, like, what is going on? How are you feeling? I mean, you have your own company. It's kind of a separate thing in a way. Like the hype cycle crashing in some ways can be good for smaller companies because then all of a sudden you compete for talent. The oxygen is not being swallowed up by these big companies. But we'll talk about that a little bit. How you feeling?
Yeah, and I think some people, that's become kind of a popular a more popular meme to talk about. My friend Clem, who's a founder of Hugging Face, has been sort of big on this since the beginning of the year. You are seeing, frankly, way too many AI companies that got started. For a while, it was really easy to raise at least the first round, and now I think a lot of them are. The space is crowded. They don't necessarily have anything original to offer. No companies are really making profits. I mean, some are generating revenue, some are generating a tremendous amount of revenue. I mean, OpenAI went from 0 to 3.5 billion AIR, I think was the latest thing, the latest report. But even Anthropic, which again most people outside of Silicon Valley have never even heard of, is doing close to a billion AIR. Cohere is doing in hundreds of millions. So these companies are, but yeah, they're competing for talent. They're overall losing money, as is always natural in the early cycle. And the salaries, to your point, are very high. I mean, I'm obviously not going to name names, but I know very junior people at OpenAI whose total pay package is in like the low seven figures now, and even they would admit that makes no sense. It's just kind of absurd. So I think even if things keep growing, I mean, I think there will be some sort of crash. I mean, there has to be, just inevitable. It's always the case. And a lot of companies are just going to find that they can't, to your point, operate or stay in business. There'll be a lot of consolidation. Salaries at some point will crash, especially when people realize that, like the reason they're paying high salaries is because of the rush, right? You're not paying high salaries because people are differentiated, is because you need something now. So, for example, if you are, and these guys are my friends, just disclosure, but you look at XAI, right? The Grok model, associated, but a separate company from X, i.e. Twitter. They raised $6 billion. You have Elon publicly saying they're going to have a model better than ChatGPT at some point soon. So there's a rush, right? Like you need to make this happen today. So the reason to spend the money, to hire the people. Also, if you're spending, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars on modeling, it does kind of make sense to like not underpay your staff. So I think you've got like a lot of positive feedback cycles, which are of course great for Silicon Valley and for tech and for good engineers. I mean, a lot of these people are not even AI people at all. They're just good systems engineers, which is kind of what you need a lot, to build these complex systems. I mean, you mentioned NVIDIA before. I mean, my team and really me and my intern were the first people to train LLMs, deep learning, as the transformer models at NVIDIA. And now that team is, 100 people, right? I read their technical report from earlier this week. It was pretty awesome. Basically, like the first actual open source version of ChatGPT, explaining all the tricks and things like that. I mean, there's 100 people in the project, give or take. So these things have grown and it makes sense, right? But yeah, I think it's interesting to look at what these AI LLM companies are really doing. I would say you can sort of put them into really just a few categories. So I'll say the first one, the so-called GPT wrappers that get a very hard time, especially from smart, high IQ scientist people. I think those companies actually make a tremendous amount of sense because GPT, to your point, people don't know how to use an API. So imagine taking the GPT API and actually turning it into like a useful mini product, like Razib GPT or something like that. I think that's cool. People like that.
Well, there is a Razib GPT.
Exactly. So, you do need that connective layer to, I think, take these things and actually make them, turn them into like a tool, especially, it's a UX thing fundamentally, right? So I think those are none of them are going to be huge companies, but that's sort of a, kind of a good cottage industry, right? You had some companies for a while that were doing pretty good business fine tuning these models. So basically taking an existing large model, usually from Stability or Mixtral, because those are open source, but occasionally even some of the OpenAI type models, and basically actually editing the model a little bit. I would say those companies, if not dead, are all dying right now because it turns out the latest models are just like better optimized. So there's less meat on the bone. Those companies are no new ones are being funded, and the current ones are probably in trouble. You do have the companies building original new models, but like I said, I mean, it really feels like right now there's probably 3 to 6 to maybe 12 organizations max that actually like can bear the expense of training large models from scratch, which means, getting the data, piping it in, either having your own cloud or spending, basically spending hundreds of millions of dollars at the very least to rent enough capacity to train it. That's why you see companies like Oracle and CoreWeave doing really well out of this. They're like, hey, we bought a bunch of GPUs that we don't use, and they're kind of printing money on renting them to people who need them. Even Microsoft has been buying and renting spare capacity from CoreWeave and Oracle, which is kind of amazing. By the way, that's why, obviously, I'm an NVIDIA stockholder, but it's not entirely obvious to me that it's peaked yet because, yeah, it's at a ridiculous multiple, but you literally have people making billions of dollars of renting their spare capacity on NVIDIA GPUs. Like the market is that sort of supply constrained.
Yeah.
But I think that's it. Like I think I think that I think ultimately the companies that are going to thrive and survive is a very small number of companies that can actually train and differentiate their model where it actually makes sense. For most of them, it doesn't. And then everything else is going to be applications, either large applications or very small niche ones like the Razib GPT kind of stuff. So I don't know. Look, again, it's weird to me, again, not living in Silicon Valley anymore. You go there and you just go to like a random Phil's in a random part of town, and it feels like half of the coffee shop is doing something with AI models, right? I don't know if that feels the same way to you, probably, right?
Yeah. No, it was. I was in SF actually recently, actually several times, and it does definitely like feel that way, and it's exciting. It's exciting, although people are always worried about the. So there is the AGI, will it destroy civilization? I think like that. My P doom is dropping. That's what I'm gonna say. It wasn't like necessarily super high, but I got a low P doom. But the macroeconomic stuff is that's also relevant, and I think people are a little worried about the hangover after. Now, I guess like one thing I want to talk to you about before we pivot back into speaking of applications and the deep news, what you're doing there, is these are like really big companies. What about like just nationalization?
Yeah.
What about China just being like, okay, you know what, we're just gonna have like a national championship, and we're basically gonna like buy stock in this company, and it's gonna be like the government of China's AI. What about governments basically getting into the competition?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And to a large extent, that is happening in China, and that is sort of a little bit how they do business, right? So for people who've read like the Chip War book, which I think is really the best thing you can read about the superconductor industry, and especially the later parts, how it was handled differently in different countries, in Japan and Taiwan and China. You're seeing this now. Like after this, we should probably get into LM-sys and why it's so interesting, because I think it's fascinating, actually. One of the cool things that come out of it. But you do see it, like I said, in the top 10, of the best, according to, many people voting on this stuff in a blind test. You do see a Chinese company, the O1 AI, which was founded by Kai-Fu Lee, who, old school tech people will remember from Microsoft and Google. But, they have a model that in English is incredibly competitive. And that is very much it's a company, but it is a Chinese national champion, and it is very good. Interestingly enough, for reasons that I don't quite understand, I can sort of guess, but weirdly, Japan has like completely missed the LLM wave for some reason. But China has been incredibly involved, and their models are very good. Even before, I remember using some of the open source Chinese models, especially in between when OpenAI had this funny period where they had some things that are really out of date. And their models are really not bad at all. Like, they're very comparable, to be honest. So I think that, the Chinese government is definitely a strong player there. They can absolutely build a giant cluster and take all the data. You can even argue that they could do things like practical things, like, for example, take things from the Internet Archive and not worry too much about whether the New York Times is going to sue them, because maybe they don't care. There's certainly an argument to be made that they're not just copying, that they're actually doing things well. So it's interesting.
So what you wanted to talk more about Libsys?
Yeah. So I think, while the big things that people sort of promised and hoped or feared mostly haven't really happened, I think around the edges we built kind of an interesting ecosystem. And one of the coolest things to emerge is, people always want to compare models, right? Like, which is model A better than model B? And we have all these tests and people, releasing data sets on very hard questions and things like that. But very much the gold standard has become LM-sys, which is you have tens of thousands of volunteers that go and fundamentally just look side by sides. They type in anything they want. These questions get cleaned up and classified later. They're very restrictive. If you go there and you ask anything that asks about the demographics, they will not answer your question, things like that. But fundamentally, it's just an API, and it sends it to two models, and you vote which one is better. And that has become the gold standard. It uses ELO ratings, which chess nerds will like, to rank these models in separately in coding and things like that, but also overall. And I think that's pretty interesting. That has emerged as like the gold standard for comparing models. I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. So you said but it's basically the top 6 or so. Like how far down do we go before we just don't pay attention? Like how's Meta AI's Meta's their Llama? How's Llama doing?
Yeah. So it's a good question. So if you look at the ELO ratings, so number 1 is GPT-4o. Then there's 3 Gemini models that are basically all the same according to LM-sys, that are tied for sort of 2nd through 4th. And if you look all the way down to so Llama 3 70 billion, which is an excellent model, by the way. It's a 1207, so it's 80 ELO points lower. So that's like a substantial difference that you would notice. But it's in a big tie for 11th place, along with Bard, the sort of the older Gemini model, and also the NVIDIA open source model, Claude 3 Sonnet, which is sort of the worst model of Claude 3. So it's still, I mean, the way I would describe, it's like even less than 100-point ELO difference. The way I would describe it is that on a bunch of like tasks that have sort of moved into like the relatively easy mode is going to do exactly great. So for example, all of these models, if you ask it a question like, here's a news headline, is this positive or negative? Is this bullish or bearish for a stock? Something like that. Not only is something like GPT-3 good at it, you're actually not going to notice a statistical difference between that and GPT-4. So a lot of the stuff we actually use these models for in practice, these, those type models are perfectly fine. Like you're not even going to notice the difference. But obviously, like the more difficult tasks, you are going to notice a difference. But you're not going to be able to tell 100% of the time, if that makes sense.
Well, I mean, so let's talk about deep news a little bit. You've been working on this. How many years have you been working on deep news? Has it been a year or more than a year?
I'd say a little bit less. I mean, I with our company, we were doing some other stuff and kind of like knew we had the team to do this. Like I really, really wanted to do this a year ago. And then we kind of got into it over the summer. And, the first very hacky version we probably released in August or September. So it's been a bit less than a year. But actually the concept of kind of has remained the same. Is you take tens of thousands of sources, most of it from Twitter, i.e. X, and you have like at a high level, relatively straightforward process. You look at all the recent information, you try to generate story candidates. Here's a cluster of tweets or articles or whatever talking about a particular thing. And then you try to see, okay, you do an initial version. Is this newsworthy or not? Is it interesting? And if it is, you try harder to write the best version of it, and then you rank it. So kind of as an example, I would say sort of an old example, but say a bunch of VCs go to vacation together in Cabo and talk about it. It's a thing. It's probably not newsworthy. Nobody really cares. But a bunch of VCs go to Burning Man and get stuck in the mud. That is interesting. So like it's a lot of it is things like that, like common sense. So you're not declaring what is or isn't news. You're really just trying to, you can train even frankly relatively small models to figure out, hey, is this sort of like, is this cluster of information interesting? And if it is, then you try more to figure out like, what are the facts? What are the interesting pieces? Do we pull in previous information? That sort of thing. So it is fundamentally kind of a little bit of a prompt chain, agent work, however you want to describe it. It's not as simple as take these tweets and summarize it. That would not work as well. But and that's basically the idea. And then the hard part gets into, okay, what things should you show first? What is actually worthy of a notification? What topics is it? Hey, like Razib, you're very interested in biology. You're not at all interested in sports, maybe even hate sports. How do we set up a view where like you're not ever going to see sports, unless maybe it like crosses over into, if there's an earthquake at the World Series, maybe you're interested. I don't know, to use a sort of a bad example.
Yeah. Well, so Google News has been around for a long time. I don't actually know, how does Google. I'm not gonna lie, I don't use Google News too much anymore. I used to use it more, but I feel like it's a little too generic. If that makes sense, but
yeah. So Google News is I mean, it's a standalone product. I know almost nobody who uses. Obviously, we all get exposed to it through Google search. The fundamental difference between what we're doing and something like Google News is that we're writing our own stories, right? Google News at core says, hey, I'm going to show you the right news article. And then it does some aggregation step and says, okay, like these 7 articles are related, right? And these are just fundamentally different things. I think being recommended articles to read is perfectly fine. I mean, Apple News does it very well. People were super into this company called Artifact that then sort of, got shut down, where now the UI and IP got bought by Yahoo while the founder went to Anthropic, but whatever. I think article aggregation is perfectly reasonable, but actually, I think what we're doing is fundamentally different in that we just say what's going on, which Google News never really tried to do and still doesn't. And I think it's actually quite hard. Like for example, I've tested many versions of Gemini. I'm very interested, of course, and my standard question was, "What's going on in the UFC?" Just tell me. I'm a big fan of martial arts, jiu-jitsu, whatever. Like what's happening in the UFC, and somebody who's informed, who's knowledgeable, can answer that question. Like, well, this fight is coming up. People are excited about this. This fight just happened. This guy got injured. This guy got banned. This guy talked shit about this other guy. And like a really informed fan or whomever could tell you this stuff, but Gemini has no ability to do this. Like it'll tell you facts, but but they're not organized in an interesting way. There's no priority. It doesn't have a concept of this fight's important, that fight's not important, because there's 30 fights every week. And actually my favorite version of Gemini, which I guess was called Bard then, there was this like quick like 1 week period where they focused on making it interesting at the expense of accuracy. So for a while you could ask Gemini, hey, what's going on in the UFC? And it would invent these interesting fights that weren't real. And that was actually fun. Like that was actually exciting. And this is what I think is something that is cool about what we're doing, is we're actually seeing, hey, here's tens of thousands of important people and official accounts, everything like this. And we've actually been able to train on like, what do people care about? Kind of democratizing it out.
yeah.
So like I said, I mentioned the Supreme Court stuff before. There's cases all the time. But which cases are actually interesting to people and why? I think you're essentially, this is sort of a little bit, mostly to Twitter, but you kind of think of the hive mind, right? Is what are people talking about? But not just random people. Obviously, you give more weight to, people who have consistently, written good things in the past, So like you have a pretty good idea, what is going on in biology, what is going on in genomics. And some of that's your own opinion, but a lot of it is just, you just have a notion of what is interesting to people. And I think the AI is now good enough to do that, which is amazing.
Yeah, that is amazing. And that's its utility. It's could we, there's this extreme. So it's like I talk to you about AI like every 6 months to a year, and we have these same discussions, or I bring up the issues like, Are we going to be able to have this discussion in a year, or will the world be swallowed up and like turned into paper clips and stupid stuff like that? But then the reality is, there are things that AI can do for us that can help us out, in terms of designing software or, organizing a party, finding the news you want, surfacing. I mean, what I would love, and I think people already have forms of this AI personal assistant, can look at your emails and everything like that, organize the calendar in a way for you. There's a lot of low level task rabbit category things where you just need someone to do it. But it's not really a high value task, but you push all of these like low value tasks that are just busy work onto the AI, and that's great, in my opinion. That increases your productivity. It allows you to focus on things you want to focus on. The main thing I think that I would worry about is over optimization, right?
Yes.
Which we've talked about with deep news and other things, where it's like sometimes there are stories I should know and I would find interesting, but I don't necessarily know it until I see it. And how do we figure that out?
Well, and that's my favorite part. Exactly. Like no offense to the people doing the optimization, like organizing my email and all that shit, but like I think that's fine. But to be honest, I think there's too many people thinking about it. I find that on some level to be quite boring. I think building a new experience with AI is a lot more interesting. It's and I think being informed, like some people will say, why would you want to know? But the truth is people do want to know. And obviously some people are more interested in the news than others. But like, for example, a story that I saw right before we were speaking was, hey, Afghanistan beat Australia in the T20 cricket, and that's something that is probably extremely meaningless to the majority of your audience, but is actually very interesting to a small percentage of your audience because it's actually a big deal. Like Afghanistan didn't even really play cricket until like some years ago, and now they're beating Australia, which is like legendary team. And there's tournaments going on. Like I would like to watch it, but it's not really on American TV. Like we can get into like the utility of it, but the truth is people are interested in these things. They want to know. And I think it's cool that the AI can route this information to me. It's distinct, it's interesting. And in theory, this can be done without LLMs, but I've never seen anyone do this. I've never seen an app that actually can figure out my interests and tell me, or even if I declare my interest and tell me in real time all the things that I want to know. That's newsy. And obviously most of the stuff we want to know is not related to news. Like I love your Substack. Your Substack has no news in it at all. It's talking about, things from tens of thousands of years ago. And that's also interesting.
Yeah.
But I think there's an element of that everybody really does want to know new information, and sort of like the hot thing that people are talking about and the new thing that just happened is just a very human thing. Some people are more into it than others, but I just think it's a really nice vector where the AI is frankly makes this possible in a way that was not possible before. And I think it's amazing. And there'll be other things like that. And frankly, like, not to be too biased, but I wish there was more startups trying to do things like that. I think there are, just in my view, too many startups that are either hey, I'm going to try to like make online shopping better, or the better assistant. And I'm like, okay, a lot of people are doing that, Or on the other end, it's just too generic. They're like, we're going to make your agents better. But what are the agents going to do? It's a weird space where I think a lot of the people the most interested in the technology are like really into the thing, and I would like to see more like practical but new applications, like things that weren't possible before. Like before we had an iPhone, Uber made no sense.
Yeah.
I think things on that level with AI will be quite interesting. And I want to know what those are going to be.
For sure. All right. So Nikolai, it's been great to have you on for the umpteenth time. I'm sure we'll have you on again in the future. The site is deepnews.com, news with a Z. So check that out. It's in the links. And I hope you guys are also using the various AI tools out there. Not everyone needs to do it, but I think it's super interesting. You learn a lot. I think it's going to be a part of, kind of like the superstructure, the framework of our worlds in a way is going to be AI powered. So I think it's a little bit. It behooves us to kind of know what's going on under the hood of the civilization. You know what I'm saying? Because I think that's one of the things with AI. It's not going to be like some humanoid robot that's going to be our companion or something anytime soon. I think there's going to be a lot of business to business, a lot of under the hood operations that will be accelerated. I am optimistic that we will see it in the productivity numbers within the next decade. And I'm not just optimistic. I think the feds are optimistic because they're hoping that productivity growth helps to save Social Security and other benefits programs. So we'll see. Nikolai, it was great talking to you. I will see you online.
Thank you, Razib.
Embryos have a 30 to 60% difference in the predisposition to severe diseases. With ORCID, parents can identify their embryo at lowest genetic risk rather than just a random outcome. Our genetic calculator can show the impact of embryo selection. Discuss embryo screening and IVF with a genetics expert.
This podcast for kids. This